Hey everybody, this is Garrett from Thunderclap Whips. Recently, I made myself a matte set of Kevlar fire whips. This was a project that I didn't have a ton of experience with, and it was a little bit outside my whip making comfort zone. Throughout the process of researching, planning, and making that pair of fire whips, I learned a lot about how to make fire whips, and I want to share what I learned with you guys today. The design that I'm going to show you guys is inspired by fire whips I've seen made by Adam Winrich and April Jennifer Choi. And if you guys want to see more of their work, I'm going to link their channels down in the description. Before we start making this whip, I just want to state the obvious and say that fire whips are extremely dangerous. You absolutely should not attempt to make this whip or crack it with fire unless you have the proper training and take the proper safety precautions. And with that said, let's start making this whip.
Okay, we're going to start by going through the things that you're going to need for this project. First, you're going to need some Kevlar thread. I have two different types here. You don't need two different types. I just have one that I like to use for binding and one that I like to use for crackers, but you can just use any sort of Kevlar thread. Next, we have this Kevlar cord. I bought this off Amazon. There's lots of different options you can get for that, but I'll put a link in the description. And then we're going to use some just normal electrical tape. Got this from Walmart. You're also going to need some artificial sinew, and I'll put a link in the description for this as well. Then this is tennis grip tape. You can get this from Walmart or any sporting goods store. Then this is some 1-inch aluminum pipe. And then this is Kevlar wicking. You can get this from most juggling supply websites. I got this from Renegade Juggling. And this is super good for our overlay because it's like a sponge and it soaks up all the kerosene. And it's also made out of Kevlar, so it's not going to melt under the flame. And then finally, you're going to want a good pair of scissors. Kevlar can be a little bit hard to cut sometimes, so having a good pair of scissors is definitely going to help out a lot during this project. So the first thing we're going to want to do is cut a 15-foot length of our Kevlar cord. We're going to want to put the two ends together and then run our finger along the end to find the middle. This whip is going to have an English eye fall hitch, and this middle point of our 15-foot strand is going to serve as our English eye. So we're going to find that middle point, wrap it around some sort of a hook or a nail, and then we're going to start doing this two-stranded twist. As you're twisting the strands around each other, you're going to want to also be twisting them between your thumb and your pointer finger, and that's what's going to give them the tension to hold. We're going to twist this for about 8 inches, and then once we get to the 8-inch mark, we're actually going to be adding another strand into the twist to become a 4-plait. And once we've added the second strand, we're actually going to do that 4-plait for the full length of the whip, and that's going to form the core that we're going to add layers onto. Okay, once we've reached 8 inches of two-stranded twist, it's time to add in our second strand. You're going to want to cut a 10-foot strand of your Kevlar cord and find the middle, and wrap that middle around the twisted strand on the right, and pull the two new strands to the right and the two old strands to the left. Now you can treat this as if it's just a normal 4-plait, bringing the upper left around through the middle and then back down to the bottom, and just start doing a normal 4-plait under 1 over 1. Okay, and once you're into the 4-plait, you can just kind of keep working on that. There's not too much you have to worry about. You're going to do 4-plait until you reach the 4.5-foot mark. And that's because we're making a 4.5-foot whip, so this is going to go the full length of the whip. It's going to serve as the core and also the fall/end of the whip. Once you reach the 4.5-foot mark, you're going to want to put the end of your whip into your vise so you have a little bit better control of it. And as if you're doing a normal fall hitch, you're actually going to hitch all the 4 strands so that they're well attached to the whip and they're not going to come undone. You don't have to worry about making it look super pretty. It does look kind of ugly, but in the end this is going to be hidden inside the handle of the whip, and we want to make sure that our strands that we're attaching to the handle are well attached to the thong of the whip. So this is an important step to make sure that everything is firmly attached and not going to move anywhere. Now we're ready to do our first belly. So what we're going to want to do is take the core and we're going to put it in the opposite way into the vise. So the hitched end is going to be the one that's next to the vise, and we're going to actually be doing this belly in the opposite direction as the core and the overlay. You're going to want to cut yourself 2 4-foot strands of your Kevlar wicking. We're going to be doing a 4-plait belly that's going to go about 1.5 feet into the thong of the whip. Once you get your 2 4-foot strands of wick measured and cut out, you're going to want to find the middle and hold it there in your hand. In order to add your 2 belly strands and begin plaiting, lay the 2 strands side by side at the top of where you want to begin plaiting. Then bring the bottom strand over the top strand, making a cross, and then bring that upper right strand around, behind, and between the 2 strands on the left. Now you're going to be able to just start doing your normal under 1 over 1 pattern. You may need to scoot your strands up a little bit to make sure that you're starting at the highest point possible. Now, when you're plaiting with this 1/2 inch Kevlar wick, it's important to make sure that you're plaiting in such a way that everything is laying flat. Especially when you're plaiting around a relatively small core, it often has a tendency to want to bunch up and not lay flat. So that's something you want to make sure you're paying attention to. And it helps to kind of run your finger along it and pull on each of the strands as you're plaiting to make sure everything is laying flat. You're going to want to continue doing this 4-plait belly until you reach the 12-inch mark. To end this belly, you're going to take some of your Kevlar thread and start by binding off the strands at the very top. This could be a little bit tricky at first, especially doing it one-handed, but get a couple wraps in and it becomes easier. Wrap the spot just enough that you're sure that nothing's going to come undone and that all the strands are well secured for the next step. Cut your 4 strands in a stair-step pattern, starting with the first strand at the very top right next to where you bound, and then going down maybe 2 or 3 inches after each cut. So each strand will be cut subsequently longer than the previous. Cutting the strands like this gives us a smoother taper and will give us a nicer transition as we are plaiting over this with the overlay. Now finish binding your tapered strands by wrapping them all the way down and all the way back up with your Kevlar thread. This is one of the more tedious filling parts of this project, but it'll definitely help you out a lot to not have all these loose strands as you are plaiting up the whip with the overlay. Once you finish binding the strands, tie off your Kevlar thread with a couple knots, and then you'll be ready to start getting prepared for the overlay. This is what your whip should look like at this point. For the overlay, begin by cutting 2 12-foot strands of your Kevlar wicking, and then find the middle and hold that in your fingers. You're going to want to begin plaiting with your 4 strands about 8 inches after where the 4-plait core began, or about 16 inches after the English eye. Attach your 4 strands using the exact same method that you used to attach your 4 belly strands. Continue plaiting until you are within 3 or 4 inches of the longest bound strand from the belly. At this point, you're going to want to add a 3rd strand, bringing your overlay up to 6-plait. Feel free to watch this part a few times until you get the hang of cleanly adding this 3rd strand into your overlay. Now that your overlay is at 6-plait, your new plaiting pattern is going to be under 2 over 1. And you're going to want to continue this pattern until you reach 8 inches from the start of the whip. To add just a little bit more thickness to the start of your whip, I like to add in an extra piece of Kevlar wicking 8 inches from the start. You're literally just going to lay it on there and then plait over it and then continue plaiting until you reach the start of the whip. Plait past the start of your first belly and even a little bit past the hitching that you did on the core. This is going to give you a nice clean spot to bind. Bind your overlay with more of your Kevlar thread. Because this is our outer layer, we want extra secure binding. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a loop of Kevlar thread that we've cut and lay it across the spot where we want to bind. We're going to be binding right in between where the first belly starts and where our hitching begins. There should be kind of a little bit of a divot where the whip is slightly thinner. And you're going to lay your loop down and then start wrapping with your Kevlar thread around the loop that you laid down. You want to be very liberal with your binding here. So if you had to choose, err on the side of binding too much. To finish off your binding, cut off your thread from the roll and take that end that you just cut off and stick it through the loop that we laid down at the start. Once you've poked your end through the little hole that you laid down, we're going to hold it firmly and then grab the other end of the loop and pull the loop through all the binding that you've done. And this is going to hold your strand underneath all the binding that you've done. So it's very unlikely that it's ever going to come undone. You can then go ahead and trim off all your excess overlay strands. At this point, you've finished your thong and all that's left to do is attach it to your handle. We're going to attach our thong to our handle by threading all of our excess strands through the handle and then binding it off with artificial sinew. Begin feeding your strands through the mouth of the pipe. You may notice that one set of strands are longer than the other, and that's totally okay. Feed the thong into the mouth of the pipe a few inches past the binding. Pull taut your longer two strands and then fold them onto the outside of the pipe. Grab your artificial sinew and begin binding the strands as tightly as you can to the outside of the pipe. Once the strands are firmly attached to the outside of the pipe, bend the strands back down in a zigzag pattern and bind them again. Continue this pattern of binding the strands and then bending them back over themselves in a zigzag pattern until you get all the way around the circumference of the pipe. This serves two main purposes. First, it securely attaches the thong to the handle, and it also builds up a foundation so we can have a knob at the end of the handle that will help with grip. To finish off our handle, we're going to start by taking this tennis grip tape and we're going to wrap it tightly around the nub that we formed at the end of the handle. And then we're going to continue spiraling up the handle until we run out of tennis grip tape. This will provide a little bit of cushioning on the handle and make it more comfortable to use. To hold the tennis grip in place, we're going to go ahead and wrap the whole thing in electrical tape. Try to tape it as tightly as you can, especially around the nub on the end of the handle. Now we are left with this ugly hole on the end of the handle, so we're just going to go ahead and cover that with electrical tape as well, cutting a few short pieces that go across. Once we've spanned the gap with a few short pieces of electrical tape, we're going to go ahead and wrap the circumference of the nub again in electrical tape just to clean up all the edges and make sure everything's looking nice and clean and smooth. What we are left with is this awesome sleek grip for our handle. That's definitely going to be a lot more comfortable than just the straight aluminum pipe. At this point, our whip is almost complete. All that's left to do is add a cracker onto the end of the English eye fall hitch. To make the crackers for this whip, I'm going to take 2 strands of this Kevlar thread. This is a little bit different than the other stuff I've been using. It's a little bit thicker and easier to work with. You can use really any Kevlar thread. Once I've cut my strands, I'm going to go ahead and find the middle and begin twisting the strands in my hand. You're going to want to twist until the strands begin to form tight twists when you loosen the tension on the strands. I'm then going to find the middle by hooking the strand around something and then bringing the two ends together. In my fingers, I'm going to slowly allow the two strands to twist around each other, making sure that it twists smoothly and that there aren't any kinks. I'm then going to tie an overhand knot about 2 to 3 inches from the non-looped side of the cracker. Trim the looped over strands on the side that need to be frayed, and then your cracker is complete. To attach your cracker to the whip, push the end of the cracker through the loop of the English eye, and then unravel the end of the cracker slightly to form a small loop. Then feed the opposite end of the cracker through that loop and pull it through. And there you have it, your finished whip. I really love this design because there isn't any exposed lashing and everything looks very clean. The 4-plat core actually adds a little bit of weight to the whip and makes it easier to crack. And the English eye makes changing crackers a breeze. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and leave a comment if you have any questions.